Well, hello everyone, and this is my response to the Albanese's budget, so I've got a lot to say. It must first be noted that a lot of budgets in Australia are under pressure right now, those of households and businesses across this country. Electricity, fuel, groceries, rents, interest rates, they're all going up, and we're not at the peak yet. It's absolutely essential the federal budget is viewed in this context, with increasing numbers of Australians today facing poverty, homelessness, or at the very least, a reduced standard of living. The federal budget is also under a lot of pressure, but it was incumbent on this new Labor government to address the cost of living crisis, and they have done very little about it. I support increases in the age pension. I also support raising the threshold at which pensioners are affected by recipients taking on paid work, because I led the debate and I called for it first. More importantly, independent retirees should also be able to be looked after. The government is also spending more on unemployment benefits in the same environment. There are more than 900,000 Australians receiving these unemployment benefits. I want to speak directly to Australians entrenched in long-term unemployment. I understand the hardship you face. I faced hardship myself as a single mother aged 21 with 2 children. I left school at the age of 15. I didn't have a trade qualification or a university degree. I received a few dollars a week in child endowment and worked part-time at a pub while a neighbour looked after my kids. I worked hard, sacrificed much, went without, and took responsibility for myself and my children. No one owed me anything. No one was responsible to put a roof over my head. That helping hand, yes. But my lifestyle, what I need to put food on my table, no. A lot of you have genuine reasons to be unemployed for a long time. You're unwell, or have a chronic illness, or you can't afford childcare, or you're escaping a violent partner or lying low. Some of you are concerned you have no qualifications, no ticket or degree or diploma, or can't even read or write, which is the case for many. Like I said, I've worn your shoes. Your appearance, tattoos and piercings, scars or poor teeth can also rule you out for a job. Only you can change your circumstances. You can't rely on the government, or anyone else for that matter, to lift you out of this situation. Take a look in the mirror and ask yourself if it's really best for you or your family to barely get by on unemployment benefits and taxpayer charity, or if it's better for you to be earning a good wage and achieving the peace of mind and economic security that comes with it. There are courses in education, training and help if you are prepared to help yourself. I'm not saying it's easy. There's no reason why it should be easy. But if I can do it, so can you. A wide range of Australian industries are screaming for workers right now, so there are plenty of jobs to be had. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Unemployment benefits are supposed to be a temporary helping hand while you look for work. They're not a lifestyle choice. We're never meant to be. And that's why it upsets me when I see people being on unemployment benefits for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, 4th generation. One Nation's policy is that unemployment benefits should only be able to be claimed 2 years out of every 5 years. It's aimed at providing a strong incentive to the long-term unemployed to change their circumstances and contribute to the economy instead of being a drain on it. It would also effectively cut taxpayer outlay on unemployment benefits by 60% over 5 years, a substantial saving for the federal budget and future generations. Our social services bill is now $228.8 billion a year. This is unsustainable. Until these issues are addressed, we are going to be entrenching long-term unemployment instead of helping unemployed Australians into good jobs. The government's quite prepared to keep paying you unemployment benefits because they've got you where they want you. And of course, you're not going to vote against them. So it's always a vote winner. But that's not helping you, and it's not helping future generations, and it's certainly not helping our country. So if you want those services and you want hospitals and schools and roads and housing and all the things that comes with the beautiful country we live in, then you have to contribute to it, not drain it. The Treasurer himself has lamented the decline in teaching standards and education outcomes, something I have been talking about for years. It's due to the decline in standards expected of teaching graduates, and here I note the commitment to create more university places at a cost of $485 million. Free places for 20,000 students. We've been giving free education for years. And I'll tell you why. We have a help debt, or the HECS, known as HECS debt, of Australians owing the taxpayers $60 billion. So it's nothing new. We've been giving out free education. No one's bothered to say, hey, hang on a minute, the taxpayers paid for your education. Don't you think that you owe it back to the country? They've given you the opportunity. But no, that's just not considered. Most of these places are likely to go to teachers, but hopefully not at the cost of further reducing teaching standards and educational outcomes in Australia. And that's why we're seeing poor standards in our schools now at the moment. You know, we've got children in Year 9 at the standard of a Year 3. They can't read or write. They can't punctuate. They can't do their maths. This is the problem that we have. And until we get teachers of a better standard coming through the educational standard, a lot of these teachers can't even read and write themselves, and they're teaching your kids. So I suggest to parents, take a good look at what's happening in your classroom and look at your child's work, because that's going to determine whether they're going to end up with a good job or not, or on unemployment benefits. I also welcome the government's commitment to revitalise TAFE colleges. I've called for that over the years, although I question why these 480,000 TAFE places are free. We should give businesses the financial assistance to employ and train apprentices first, then encourage TAFE positions. We should also be very careful not to waste taxpayers' dollars to have people do TAFE courses only to find at the end there are no jobs. You see, by getting people to do courses or voluntary work, charity work, you're not classified as unemployed. It suits the government to have unemployment figures down. It's not to your benefit. Like I said, I'm all for TAFE colleges. I'm all for these agricultural colleges that should be kept open and not shut down. But let's make sure if we do it, it's for the right reasons, and people must end up with a job at the end of it. I'm disappointed there's nothing in this budget about boosting apprenticeships, except apparently $95.6 million for a new energy apprenticeships. I'll tell you now, don't bother applying for one of these if you're not Indigenous or you don't come from a culturally or linguistically diverse background, because that's what they've stated. You're not getting the job unless you're that. Or I think you might be able to get a job if you're female. Forget it if you're male, if you're white male. You've got no hope, mate. Has the government asked itself who is actually going to build its planned 1 million new homes in 5 years? Where are all those tradies going to come from? This is why I have always championed subsidised apprenticeships and why the regional apprenticeship program I designed was so successful, creating more than 3,000 new apprenticeship places in regional Australia. As I've said before, and I'll say it again, unemployment benefits should be a temporary helping hand, not a lifestyle choice. We must give unemployed Australians, particularly the long-term unemployed, much greater incentive to get the jobs that are going begging right now. It will mean fewer Australian jobs being outsourced to overseas workers and more government revenue from personal income tax, and hopefully jobs going to Australians and not the migrants they want to flood this country with. That is actually going to be a big impact on your standard of living. More congestion on the roads, longer to see a doctor, longer to get into the hospitals, less better qualified, larger classrooms, you name it, you can expect that. Let me highlight some of the mistakes in this budget. About $800 million is going to be spent on making electric vehicles cheaper. These things are a great example of the hidden costs which come with climate change policies. The batteries powering these things last only 8 years and need to be replaced at a cost up to $42,000. I wonder if the government will subsidise that. I wonder if the government will compensate those EV users when their cars catch fire, as they are often prone to do. I wonder if the government has considered where the electricity power of these EVs is going to come from, considering the amount of generation being removed from the grid. It's a very short-sighted, feel-good policy which, again, will not make any difference to global carbon dioxide emissions. The budget includes another $204 million to be spent on the Great Barrier Reef. That is after Malcolm Turnbull already spent $500 million on it, and it follows reports that the reef is actually in the best health it's been in ages. It's another waste of money, no doubt being spent to appease international climate zealots and create jobs for the boys. The budget includes an additional $1.6 billion for women and children who are victims of domestic violence. Once again, I'm disgusted there's no acknowledgement that men make up 25% of DV victims. Men are not the only perpetrators, women are the perpetrators. There was a story in the Courier Mail only this week about a woman throwing hot cooking oil into her husband's face, and another the week before about a woman assaulting a man attempting arson. And what about the murder of men because of over DV? Oh, you don't hear much about that. I will never stop fighting for men to be recognised as victims of domestic violence and for them to receive the same support as women and children. The budget has allocated $75 million to prepare for a referendum on the proposed Indigenous voice to Parliament. Already, we are being slugged with the costs of this exercise in racial division and separatism. Another $1.2 billion will go towards closing the gap, including over $100 million to help Indigenous communities adapt to climate change. Indigenous communities? What about everyone else? Closing the gap? How much money have we spent out trying to close the gap? What's changed? Oh no, let's throw another $1.2 billion at it. What a waste. There is even $1.5 million in this budget to support the commemoration of the 15th anniversary of the Stolen Generations Apology. That's your money. That's your hard-earned money that go to other projects that are more worthwhile. I'm sorry, I'm disgusted, and it's even more waste. This is just more money for the unaccountable Aboriginal industry, which has never succeeded in actually closing the gaps. They won't close the gaps because it would end their gravy train, and I've been saying that for the last 28 years. I will not stop fighting for this predatory industry of virtue singlers and bureaucrats to be held accountable for all the money they've wasted. there has been a massive $8.4 billion blowout in the cost of the National Disability Insurance Scheme. One Nation supports the NDIS in principle, but we are extremely concerned that its funding is not sustainable, that providers are rorting the system, and that our money is being spent on bogus therapies like hiring sex workers. I note the government has acknowledged the need to ensure funding is sustainable and that the Prime Minister has flagged a crackdown, but I'm not confident they will rein in these unnecessary costs and stop the rorts. The budget projects the NDIS will cost taxpayers $51.8 billion in 4 years, and at the moment there's only 550,000 people that are on it, and at this rate it will cost taxpayers more than the age pension in a few years, and it will cost more, and it costs more than Medicare costs for the whole of the country for 26 million people. Put it in the right perspective and you might understand what I'm talking about. There is a big rip-off happening here. People are abusing the system and people are getting quite rich out of it. Now let's talk about debt and deficits. Imagine your household earns $1,000 a week, but your bills are $1,200 per week. That makes your weekly deficit $200. Over a year, that accumulates to a debt of $10,400. Now imagine that you earn $596.4 billion per year, but your expenses are even higher, in this case, $623 billion. Now imagine multiple deficits of this magnitude over many years, all adding to our accumulated debt. The Australian government's gross debt in 2021-22 was $895.3 billion. This current financial year is projected to be $927 billion, and the following year it will crack the $1 trillion mark for the first time. $1 trillion. That is a million times $1 million. These are astronomical figures. That's more than 40% of the value of all the goods and services Australia produces in a year, what's called our gross domestic product or GDP. And remember that when you borrow money, you have to make interest payments. The Australian government will pay $18.9 billion in interest next year, and in 4 years this will increase to $32.6 billion. That's interest alone. You're getting nothing for it. You know what it's like. You got your mortgage on your own home. You look at what you pay in interest. Well, this is what we are paying on the interest for the country. Imagine what we could do with $32.6 billion. To give you an idea of just how much money that is, it's almost as much as Australia's entire annual defence budget. Our current costs, that amount of money, could build more than 300 new high schools or 30 state-of-the-art new hospitals. But the problem is more fundamental than a few billion here or a few billion there. When you keep borrowing money and don't pay it back, your leader will only keep lending at higher interest rates. With less confidence in Australia's ability to manage its finances, our currency is devalued, and this leads to the rising inflation we are all experiencing. A devalued currency means we have to pay more for the things we import into Australia, like fuel or electronics, and it means we get less money for our exports. It also means the Reserve Bank will work to get inflation under control, and it does this by raising the interest rates we pay on our home and car loans. So if you're in debt yourself, it makes things worse for you. I said earlier the federal government's debt was more than 40% of our GDP. Australia's private debt, money borrowed by households and businesses, is about 135% of the GDP. You see the problem here? We need more government revenue and lower government spending to get this under control, and the sooner we do it, the better. Hence my argument about the whole amount of money and what we're paying out. It's unnecessary, unwarranted, and we need to tighten our belts. So elbow Stop employing more public servants. That's where a lot of our taxes are going. But this means only higher taxes and fewer government services, unlike we make some radical changes. Many times I've spoken about the urgent need for tax reform to ensure foreign-owned multinationals pay their fair share of tax in Australia. I've discussed this matter with the Prime Minister and the Treasurer, who I noted was quoted in the Australian Today. He would not rule out strengthening the petroleum resource rent tax to boost revenue. I've been talking about the need to reform the PRRT for many years. And when I spoke to the Prime Minister, new Prime Minister Albanese, when he got elected, he knew nothing about the PRRT. He knew nothing about our gas exports off the Western Shelf. He knew nothing of the fact that it's going to bring in $81 billion in exports, what it produces, but we're only making a few $100 tax from it. We're sitting on the golden egg and no one wants to hatch it for the Australian people. And that's how ridiculous it is. Even Peter Dutton knew nothing about it, or Michaeli Cash. Matt Canavan was useless as a resource minister because he knew nothing about it as well, or understood what was going on. And this is why I'm so furious about all this, is that I've been screaming from the rooftops that we have the resources here to pull this country back into prosperity and stop the poverty and the cost of living rises that's costing Australians here and headed down this path of climate change radical ideology that is destroying our economy. And as I said, it was disappointing to learn the Prime Minister knew virtually nothing about the PRRT or the squandering of the golden goose that is Australia's gas resources on the Northwest Shelf. This budget highlights that domestic gas prices, already sky high, are set to increase by 40% over the next 2 years. My bill to amend the Offshore Petroleum Greenhouse Gas Storage Act, opposed by the Greens and the major parties in the previous sitting, would have increased the supply of gas in the domestic market and put downward pressure on prices. I'm therefore understandably sceptical the Treasurer will make the PRRT deliver what the Australian people deserve, and I'm talking about billions of dollars a year. Many times I've also spoken about the urgent need to stop wasting money on climate change. Renewables have been a disaster and are set to deliver further disasters and have only increased our power bills while making power more unreliable. We've already witnessed European nations return to coal and other fossil fuels to generate electricity, thanks to a profound wind drought. Ending the costly subsidies for renewables is an obvious, desirable and very sensible way to substantially reduce government expenditure. While they're at it, the government needs to reverse this new pledge to reduce Australia's methane emissions by 30% by 2030. This is nothing less than a direct attack on Australia's world-leading livestock industries, and will only increase the cost of meat and many other products we derive from livestock. It seems that just about every climate measure any government takes on ever leads to everything costing more. Here's a radical idea: stop the climate measures. It's well established. They make no difference to the climate and only cost taxpayers and consumers more money. All those many billions of dollars would be better spent on long-term investments in Australia's future prosperity. There is virtually none of this investment in this budget and virtually nothing to improve national productivity. We've seen some good projects cancelled or put on hold, especially in Queensland. The $5.4 billion earmarked for the Hells Gate Dam project in North Queensland has been scrapped. There were substantial benefits from this project. More than 10,000 jobs during construction, contributing about $1.3 billion to the local economy, more than 3,000 ongoing jobs, up to 60,000 hectares of new irrigated land producing a diverse range of high-value produce worth at least $800 million per year, and up to $6 billion per year contributed to the local economy. There was so much that was good about this project that it was significantly oversubscribed by private investors. In this land of drought and flooding rains, dams are an essential investment in Australia's future. They're insurance against future droughts and to help mitigate floods. Their long-term investments in water and food security. They're wealth creators, putting otherwise wasted water to productive use in agriculture, industry and energy generation. Labor has cut the $483 million for the Urunna Dam near Mackay and deferred funding for the Hughenden Irrigation Project and the $126.5 million Emu Swamp Dam and Pipeline. Remember, the dam they stopped people were trucking the water in, and in Queensland, and they're not going to go ahead with it. So if you end up in that situation again, you can't even supply water to your own town, you're going to have to truck it in, or people are actually sending up bottles of water. An important project like that, and the government has stopped the building of that dam. Labor obviously has the wrong priorities here. I'm also disappointed that funding for some key rail projects in Queensland has also gone missing. I welcome the money allocated to upgrading the Bruce Highway, although it falls far short of the work needed to make this dangerous highway safe. Hardly a day goes by when traffic doesn't slow to a crawl on the Bruce Highway due to one accident or another. To summarise this budget, it's a stark warning of things to come, but Labor has squibbled the opportunity to make the necessary measures that will see us through these tough times. Until the government understands the need for comprehensive tax reform and gains the courage to do it in the face of threats by foreign-owned multinational tax dodgers, we will only continue to be ripped off and accumulate debt that many future generations of Australians will be paying for decades to come. Thank you for your time.